About. Dan Schneider joins us now, Vice President of MRC, Free Speech America. Uh-oh, that sounds dangerous. Dan, good to have you with us.
Vince, if you just played that clip with Margaret, and she has to tell, like a bad poker player, who's bluffing and their eye twitches.
Yeah.
Like so many journalists, she says, as she says, trying to trap Marco Rubio into the lie, the false premise that free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. This is what they do. They create a false premise and then try to coax the interviewee into accepting their false premise, when we all know that the genocide was caused by moral reprobates who were murderers who hated Jews.
Right, and who hated speech and who hated divergent opinions. The idea that the Nazi regime represented like the epitome of free speech or free speech gone awry is one of the most insane things I've ever heard any television commentator say. And that's a high bar.
Yeah, but this is where the left has this perverted logic. And I think you and I have talked about this before. The radical left today claims that like big tech companies have a First Amendment right to discriminate people based on their race, their disability, their religion, and their political viewpoint. And I've never understood this weird, twisted logic, but a First Amendment right that trumps our federal laws that protect against race discrimination, et cetera, a First Amendment right to discriminate. And now she's claiming that it's free speech that resulted in the murder of 7 million Jews.
Yeah, it really is a tell. There's a lot of tells in there, as you point out. But the authoritarian impulse is overflowing from Margaret Brennan, because what you hear her say, and this is unfortunately, it's very commonplace on the left, is that free speech is dangerous and that people, giving their viewpoints and engaging in a battlefield of ideas is a threat to whatever system she thinks she's defending.
Yeah, and again, it's just the paradox here. The First Amendment includes first free speech and then freedom of the press. She enjoys having a freedom of the press, but that freedom only exists because we first and foremost have free speech rights. It's through the press that we can then amplify our voices.
Yeah.
Yet she seems to want to be the only one to have any rights whatsoever.
So what is it about the left and the Nazi analogies? So you've been studying these guys in media for a while, Dan. It seems like they only have one analogy and they don't know how to use it.
Well, look, I think there are different reasons for different people. Margaret Brennan, I find her a little suspect. She was a Middle Eastern studies major who studied, a good part of her academic career was in Jordan. You kind of wonder where she actually stands when it comes to Israel. She certainly has tendencies that lean anti-Israel here. And I can go into other things that are known about her. But, I think she lives in a twisted world where basic American values she finds abhorrent when they're exercised by other Americans.
Also, there's nothing, journalistic about her behavior, because she mocked the idea that J.D. Vance was addressing a real phenomenon. J.D. Vance, in his speech last week, listed off a number of genuine threats to free speech and free conscience, including things like the British government arresting people who are silently praying while standing on street corners. He laid out very good evidence for this. If anything, Margaret Brennan should be asking questions of the British government for instance, the German government, which is arresting people for posting memes they disagree with on the internet.
Right. The example you just gave that J.D. Vance articulated, there's a gentleman who was doing nothing but standing silently praying. He wasn't even exercising free speech rights. He was exercising his right to religious expression and viewpoint. And he was simply standing silently praying. And the police asked him what he was doing. And he said, well, I'm praying for an unborn child. And he was arrested for praying silently. Again, another First Amendment right, freedom of religion. The radical left despises our First Amendment rights. They just can't stand that people would have opinions that they would either hold privately or articulate to others if those opinions contradict their left-wing narrative.
Yeah, and she was framing it, to the extent that we've heard her talk about this, as, oh, he's only trying to defend conservatives and right-wingers. I was like, well, so is there a problem? I'm sorry. So is a right-winger not allowed to express his or her viewpoints? They're not allowed to pray silently?
You know, the left in America used to be great on free speech rights. Just 2 decades ago, the ACLU would file suit on behalf of anybody to protect their rights to speech. And that's just all changed in the last 10 years or so, where now the left despises any viewpoint and the expression of any viewpoint that they don't approve. And so then they call us nasty names and characterize us in nasty ways. And big tech and big media have both been collaborators in this, but no more. We've won, and now we've got to restore our country.
I've noticed that the person who calls for silencing their opponent usually doesn't have a strong enough argument to win. Is that what this is?
We've seen it over and over and over, where the left just, calls us Nazis. They call us racists. They call us all kinds of names because they don't want to get engaged in a conversation. Because ultimately, how can they defend this idea that you have a First Amendment right to discriminate against somebody based on their religion or their race or their viewpoint? How can you defend that kind of stuff?
You know, it's funny that it came from CBS, too, of all places. So Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation, which is their Sunday morning show, comes out and says, this is ridiculous. And this is what the Nazis did. They used free speech to start the Holocaust. And then in the evening on CBS's 60 Minutes, they aired a segment where they interviewed a number of German prosecutors who were proudly saying that they were arresting people for the things that they post on the internet. Take a listen to some of this. This is from 60 Minutes last night.
Is it a crime to insult somebody in public?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
And it's a crime to insult them online as well?
Yes.
The fine could be even higher if you insult someone in the internet.
Why?
Because in internet, it stays there. If we are talking here face to face, you insult me, I insult you, okay, finish. But if you're in the internet, if I insult you or a politician...
That sticks around forever.
Yeah.
The prosecutors explain German law also prohibits the spread of malicious gossip, violent threats, and fake quotes.
If somebody posts something that's not true, and then somebody else reposts it or likes it, are they committing a crime?
Yeah, in the case of reposting, it is a crime as well, because the reader can't distinguish whether you just invented this or just reposted it. That's the same for us.
The punishment for breaking hate speech laws can include jail time for repeat offenders.
Okay, so let me understand all this, Dan. So CBS's journalists, they go out and they find out that Germany is arresting people for the things that they post on the internet. No, even repost from someone else. And if it's wrong, they can be criminally penalized for posting that, wrong in the eyes of the government. And yet J.D. Vance is the villain of this story for calling that out?
Yeah, Vince, Germans have a long history of depriving people of their civil rights, with knocks on the door. In that same clip, I found it funny that the German police show up at somebody's house at 6:01 a.m. If nothing else, the Germans are very punctual in their enforcement of their laws. This is and to cite Germany as an example of protecting people's civil rights, I don't even know where to begin with this kind of swill.
Well, it's the height of absurdity, because she just straight up said that free speech caused the Holocaust, and then I guess that becomes an endorsement for Germany, like, clamping down on the civil liberties of its own people, a la the Nazis. It's actually so insane what we're witnessing.
Yeah, I keep on hearing, that German voice in the movies, asking if you have papers.
Yeah.
The kind of free speech that was permissible back then was turning over your papers, your documents, to show that you're a good German in good standing, or else. Or else. No,
it's so funny because, like, I don't know about you, but, like, when we were all growing up, most of the movie villains were Germans. It was like because they were just like either outright Nazis or like you had German villains to kind of really emphasize this is the bad guy. And yet now the left is like turning to Klaus Schwab and these these German prosecutors as like exemplars of the way we need to conduct ourselves. And meanwhile, the rest of us were all trained under the idea that, like, hey, if you're coming in with a heavy German accent saying the government's right and the people are wrong, that's a bad sign.
Well, it was very traumatic for me as a kindergartner when we would play, Army, and nobody wanted to be the German, but I had this German last name, Schneider.
Yeah.
Like I was always forced to be the German, the bad guy.
I don't know. Indiana Jones trained me to think that there were problems with that. At any rate, Dan, thank you. With MRC Free Speech America, soon to be labeled a terrorist group by the German government. Good to talk to you today, Dan.